mature or a profound human being, or are you part of the limitless universality, although you were born in a particular group, which I respect and come from myself? That's the sort of principle he would have. Now that is an attitude of revolutionary snobbery in a way, but it's snobbery based upon ideas of character. And in the end, as we know politically, character is a fundamentally important thing. And the absence of it, particularly in quasi-authoritarian movements, is poisonous, because people once in place cannot be removed, except by the most radical of means. So there is a degree to which leadership is all important. Look at an army. An army is not a gang of thugs, but it can easily become one. An army can easily become a rabble, but armies are controlled by hierarchies of force, the nature of which is partly impalpable. Each squad has a natural leader. Each squad has an uncommissioned officer. Each squad has an officer above them. Each squad has an officer above them. In real armies, German, British armies of the past, one officer goes down, somebody replaces them from lower down, assumes immediately the responsibility that goes with that role. Even if all the officers are gone, and all the non-commissioned officers, the natural leader, the one of the 5%, most behavioural anthropologists believe that 1 in 20 of all people have leadership criteria and step forward in a moment of crisis and are looked to by the others because they provide meaning and order and hierarchy in a moment of stress. Have you ever noticed that when people undergo disaster or when they're in difficulties, they look for help, but they also look for people to lead them out of it? Leaders are never liked because it's sort of lonely at the top. But leadership is like probably the desire to believe in something beyond yourself, is inborn. And while the principle of leadership remains, where in even democratic societies, leaders are required in order to energise the democratic masses. Don't forget, most of the Caesarisms of modernity are red forms of Caesarism, forms of extreme authoritarianism and even pitilessness, all in the name of the people. All raised in the name of the masses and their glory and their freedom, their liberty and their equality. When Forbes magazine says that the Castro's family's wealth in communist Cuba is $70 million US, when it calls them communist princes, when it's, don't forget, an ordinary man in Cuba can be imprisoned for owning his own plumbing business. When you realise that these people are princelings of reversal, you sense that some of the hierarchies, although they wear different names and different forms, are now occurring in an entropic phase or in a culture of decay, do relate to many of Evola's ideas. He would say, even in reversal, he would say this is because these ideas are eternal and are perennial and will out in the end. The traditional political right-wing criticism of these sorts of ideas is that they're purely philosophical, they relate to individuals and their lives, they tend to Hermeticism and the ascetic view that a learned spiritual man, a man of some substance, can go off and live by himself and the rest can rot down to nothing and who cares. They say that they feed a sort of post-aristocratic misanthropy. Look at our own aristocracy. They probably lost power in about 1912. They were never shot like in the Soviet Union. They were never beheaded like in revolutionary France 200 years before. But they have lost everything in a way because their function has been taken from them, hasn't it? The reason for those schools, the reason they were bred in the first place, the reason for all their privileges and so on has been taken away. The fascination with the Lord Lucan case in the 70s, the sort of decline of that class, you know, he listens to Hitler's speeches at Oxford, beats the nanny to death, can't even get the right woman in the basement. This sort of thing, couldn't even get that right, you know, couldn't even get the crime right, you know. It's the decline of a class, isn't it? You know, going down and knowing they've gone down as well. It's sort of Oswald Mosley, his son enjoys being dressed up as a woman and spanked, and his son's just died of a heroin overdose. And it's not, and yet Oswald Mosley is in that family chain. You don't need to really think that there is a sort of efflorescence there. It's a bit unfair on that family and so on. But don't forget, this was a class that was born to pitilessness and rule. This was a class that identified with eagles. That's why it put them on their shields and on their ties and on their schools. And now look at them. But of course, They have, in a sense, joined the rest, haven't they? They've joined the mass. What they once were no longer matters. Cameron sums it up in a strange sort of way. Traditionally, since the 1960s, the Tories have always elected pushy middle-class people with whom the mass of their electoral support can identify. It was always said Douglas Hume would be the last of the old breed. He was Premier when I was born. He would be the last of the old breed that would survive and thrive. When asked about unemployment in 1961, Douglas Hume said, there's a room for a second gamekeeper on my estate. And people said he was out of touch. And he was out of touch, let's face it. But he thought that was a quite commodious and moral answer, you see. Cameron is strange because all of the ease before the camera, the ease before people, no notes, look at me, not a trembling lip, all of that ease is part of the genetics of what he partly comes out of. And yet all of his values are bourgeois. All of his values are middling and mercantile. All of his values are this society as it now is. Would Douglas Hume have joined or even given money to United Against Fascism, who he would have regarded as smelly little people on the margins of society, who were a left-wing rabble, who probably need to be beating the grass somewhere or in my regiment? Do you see what I mean? The idea that he would identify with these people because the real enemy represents the seeds of the aristocracy from which one has fled, that wouldn't occur to him. He was too much what he was, basically, as a form, to really consider these lies and these legerdemain and this flight of fancy. One comes to the most controversial area of Evola's entire prognosis, and this is the belief that Jewishness is responsible for decline, and that they are a distinct and another race that pushes upon things and causes things to fall and be destroyed. These are the views, of course, the belief that there is a morphic element in the nature of the decline that has made him so untouchable and controversial. The interesting thing is, when he was approached about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is believed by all liberal humanist scholars to be a forgery, and a forgery of the Akron secret police based upon an alleged French novel, I think, of the 19th century, Evola said, I'm not concerned whether it's a forgery or not, which is a very interesting response, because in Evola's view of the world, his occultistic and hermetic view of the world, you can indicate something through its reversal. You can indicate something through metaphoricization. Something can be emotionally true and not completely factually true. A text can be used to exemplify truths deeper than its own surface. This is a religious view of the text, of course, that the text does not end with itself. It's a medieval view, and is based upon a science of linguistic study called hermeneutics, where you would look at every word, you would look at every paragraph, you would look at every piece of syntax to deconstruct for essence rather than deconstruct to find the absence of essence. In the Western world, if you go to university now and you do any humanities, any arts, any liberal arts or any social science course, you will come across an ideology called deconstruction. Even vaguely, the semi-educated have heard of it. This is a viewpoint that says that any essentialisms, race, class isn't an essentialism, but it begins to become one in the minds of man, belief in God, gender, and so on. Any essentialism leads to the gates of Auschwitz. This is what deconstruction is based on as a theory. Therefore, you look at every text, you look at every film, because they're obsessed with mass culture. You see, looking at what the masses look at and what they're fed by the capitalist cultural machine. And they look at this and they say, oh, look, dangerous essentialism there. Do you see that in that John Wayne film? Do you see the way he spoke to the Red Indian? Sorry, Native American, you know, this sort of thing. You see that sort of thing. And you look at these things and you break them down and you break them down again and you break down the element of sort of David Duke, quote-unquote, logic that could be said to lie in that particular phrasing and so on. But the sort of analysis that Evola maintains is what you might call constructionism rather than deconstructionism. And that's building upon the essences of things and bringing out their discriminatory differences. So to him, the fact that that text may have been put into circulation by the Okhrana, the Tsarist secret police, as a profound hermetic metaphoricization for courses of history which may or may not be occurring is worthy of study. He again returns to the idea that everything has